I found a white stain on my husband's underwear after his business trip. It wasn't mine. I stood frozen, wondering what had happened. Then I did one thing that left him shocked and turned everything upside down. My name is Emilia, and I used to believe that certainty was something you earned through years of effort, a quiet, unshakable bedrock beneath a life well built. 5 years with Damon Voss had taught me to trust the routines we established, the small, tender rituals that spoke louder than any grand declarations. The way he would tap 3 times on the bathroom mirror before leaving. The way he held my hand in crowded airport terminals. That certainty I felt when I heard his key turn in the lock, knowing that the man I trusted was home. I thought I knew the man I married. I thought I knew the life we were building. I was wrong. Damon returned from his San Diego trip just as the sun was dipping below the downtown skyline. The late afternoon light cast long, nervous shadows across our hallway, shadows that seemed to cling to him. He looked tired, but it wasn't the weariness that comes from long meetings and re-day flights. It was something heavier, a strained energy that made his shoulders tight and his movements jerky. When I leaned in to kiss him, he angled his body away, a minute, almost imperceptible shift, small enough to pass as nothing, but large enough for a wife of 5 years to feel like a blow. "Long trip," he said, his voice flat. He avoided my eyes, focusing instead on the pile of mail on the console table. I took his suitcase into the bedroom, moving out of habit. Unpacking his bag was always one of my post-trip routines, a way to gently usher him back into our shared space. I lifted the flap and began organizing the clothes. His folded shirts were neat, his toiletries exactly where they should have been. But then I reached the corner of the bag, where his dirty clothes were usually bunched together. That's when I found it. His underwear, a soft gray fabric pushed deep into the lining. It felt stiff to the touch. I pulled it out and held it up to the waning light. A faint, dried white stain marred the cotton. For a full, brutal second, my entire body just locked. My hands stopped moving. My breath dipped into a terrible silence, and the meticulous, ordered structure of my mind flattened into a single agonizing question: what happened? And why? Something inside me snapped, but not in the way people expect. There was no scream, no flood of tears. Just a cold, calculating click. The logical side of my brain, the side that thrives on data and objective truth, took control. The emotional side, the woman who believed in the promises they made on their wedding day, went completely silent, retreating for self-preservation. Damon walked into the room moments later, a towel draped around his neck, his hair still wet and dripping onto the carpet. The second he saw the underwear clutched in my hand, he flinched. It was a clean, sharp reaction, like guilt had reached out of the air and physically slapped him. He recovered quickly, too quickly. The speed of his denial was as damning as the stain itself. "Lotion?" he said, his voice almost bored, dismissive. "Probably spilled from my toiletry bag in transit." "Don't worry about it." My voice said nothing at all. I didn't blink. I walked into the adjoining bathroom, pulled a clean plastic bag from under the sink, and carefully slipped the fabric inside, tying the knot tight. His eyes followed every single movement, darting from the plastic bag to my face, waiting for the explosion, the hysterical crying, the dramatic accusation he had already rehearsed an answer for. But I didn't give it to him. I was calm, unnervingly calm. And that silence frightened him more than shouting ever could have. He saw the cold, controlled certainty in my eyes, the look of a woman who wasn't looking for an argument, but for facts. That night, I lay next to him in our massive bed. He felt utterly unfamiliar. His breathing, once a comforting rhythm I knew intimately, now sounded like the heavy presence of a stranger invading my space. I stared at the ceiling, wondering when the man I loved had started slipping away, and why, as meticulous as I was, I hadn't noticed the decay until it manifested as physical evidence in my hand. I knew I needed to act before fear could stop me. I knew that control, my only defense, meant that I needed to find a truth he couldn't lie his way out of. Continuing her unnatural calm, Emilia acted the next morning before fear could stop her investigation. The moment Damon left for work, giving me the usual angled kiss on the cheek, I felt the last vestige of the wife I used to be slip away. What remained was Emilia the analyst, driven by the cold necessity of survival. I took the plastic bag holding the soiled underwear and placed it in a secure container. I didn't drive to the police or a lawyer first. I drove to a private forensic lab 20 miles outside the city center. I had spent the night researching facilities with absolute discretion. When I met the intake specialist, a woman with tired eyes and a professional indifference, I kept my voice measured and my request simple. I told her I needed the sample analyzed for any traceable organic fluids. Then I added the two chilling requests that confirmed this wasn't just about cheating, a DNA profile, and an HIV marker test. Signing my name on the form, I noticed my hand wasn't trembling. It was a terrifying steadiness, the kind of stillness that comes just before a major tremor. It wasn't bravery. It was pure, self-protective calculation. While I waited for the results, a promised return time of 48 hours, I began tracing the timeline of Damon's subtle shifts. I wasn't looking for a single moment of betrayal anymore. I was looking for the crack in the foundation. I realized the shift hadn't happened on the San Diego trip. It began weeks earlier, right after his company retreat to Aspen. He had described the Aspen trip as a week of team development, endless seminars, and compulsory networking dinners. But the man who returned from Colorado wasn't the same one who had kissed me goodbye at the airport. Damon started waking up in the middle of the night, sometimes sitting bolt upright in bed, breathing hard, as if running from something he refused to name. His schedule changed without explanation. A mysterious early meeting here, an uncharacteristic late night there. I noticed him erasing messages on his phone with a frequency that was impossible to ignore. Every time I asked if everything was all right, he would answer too quickly, too neatly, like someone reciting a carefully crafted script. Then came the scent. A soft, floral perfume that wasn't mine, clinging stubbornly to the collar of a shirt I was putting in the laundry. When I asked him about it, he shrugged. Hotel room fragrance? Emilia. They use those powerful air fresheners now, but I had stayed in enough high-end hotels over the years to know exactly how they smelled: sterile, clean and vaguely citrusy, never rich, floral, and intimate. The anxiety became a physical weight, pressing down on my chest. It felt like walking on rotten floorboards, knowing that at any second the wood could crack and send me falling through the floor. To quiet my mind, I started tracing his expenses, and there it was, tucked into the pocket of his blazer, a receipt from a high-end bar in Aspen. Dated the night he claimed he had been in bed early, preparing for the next day's seminar. 2 days later, the forensic lab called. I pulled the car over, my heart hammering a sudden, panicked rhythm against my ribs. Betraying the calm front I had maintained. The technician was polite, professional, and brutally concise. "We have the results on the sample you provided, Mrs. Voss." I held my breath. "The DNA profile does not match your husband, and I need to inform you that the sample tested reactive for HIV markers." The world around me went silent. The cold, logical control I had desperately clung to spiked through my chest and settled deep into my bones. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was a danger he had brought into my life. The realization that he had not only risked our marriage, but our very lives, was the catalyst. My focus shifted instantly and permanently. I didn't feel heartbreak anymore. I felt an urgent, terrible need for justice and protection. I drove home, the envelope containing the results sitting like a lead weight on the passenger seat. I didn't confront him. I didn't scream or ask him why. I just sat with the truth, treating it like a loaded weapon I wasn't yet ready to fire. My silence unsettled him more than any tearful outburst could have. He kept watching me, his brows tightening, waiting for me to lash out. But I didn't. Not yet. That night, looking at Damon across our kitchen table, I finally understood I wasn't looking at my husband at all. I was looking at the man who shattered the life I thought we shared, who had no idea I already held the objective, scientific proof of his betrayal in my hands. And somehow, that terrifying emptiness inside me was far worse than the superficial pain of infidelity. I was resolved this was no longer a personal fight, it was an investigation. With the proof of danger in her hands, Emilia knew she needed professional help to navigate the corporate shadows Damon had fallen into. The knowledge that the fluid was not Damon's, and worse, that it carried a potentially lethal risk, had shifted my entire perspective. This was no longer a marriage problem. It was an entanglement with something dangerous, linked to his company, Hart Dominion. I didn't want to hire a typical divorce lawyer, someone who specialized in emotional custody battles. I needed strategy, legal coldness, and a mind that understood corporate deceit. I found Marlowe Quinn, an attorney specializing in complex white-collar litigation and high-asset divorces. Marlowe's office overlooked the river, serene and deceptively calm. When I laid out the facts, the stain, the Aspen receipt, the HIV-reactive lab result, Marlowe didn't gasp or offer pity. She simply studied me with a profound concentration. "What do you want, Emilia?" she asked, her voice low and direct. "The truth," I said, placing the lab results on her polished mahogany desk. "Not revenge. Not a messy fight. I want the objective truth about what happened, and I want to protect myself from whatever danger he has invited into our lives." I knew deep down that truth would break the last illusion of my marriage, but I craved clarity over comfort. Marlowe leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand. "Whatever we find, you need to be prepared for it to hurt more than you think. Corporate lies are rarely about love. They're about leverage." I nodded, feeling a kinship with her pragmatic approach. She saw the situation as a problem to be solved, not a tragedy to be wept over. Marlowe immediately recommended Ezra Pike, a retired police detective who had moved into private investigation. Ezra was a man of minimal words and massive presence. When we met, he looked at me not with pity, but with a wary, knowing recognition, as if he had cataloged my exact devastation many times before. "I only take cases where the client can handle the facts," he said, his voice gravelly. "Anything we find could change the direction of your life forever." "Change has already happened, Ezra," I replied, looking him squarely in the eye. "I just haven't caught up to it yet." Ezra started his work immediately, focusing his resources entirely on Damon's professional activities and the mysterious Aspen retreat. Within 48 hours, patterns began to emerge. Damon had been claiming he had to stay late at work nearly every night that week. His office was 20 miles west of our home, yet Ezra's phone tracking, which I hadn't yet installed myself, consistently pinged the same location every evening after 7:30. A quiet neighborhood along the river in Portland, far from the corporate headquarters. The GPS logs repeated the exact address, a confession Damon couldn't stop making. It was a single, family home with high fences and mature landscaping far from the anonymous setting of a hotel. Then came the first crucial piece of external evidence. I received a text message from an unknown number. It was brief and unsettling, from someone who identified themselves only as a former colleague of Damon's. The message read, "Don't trust what he says about Aspen. It was never just a retreat." My hands shook as I read it. My instincts screamed that the stain on his underwear wasn't the first sign of betrayal, just the first one I couldn't rationally ignore. Out of desperation and quiet dread, I searched online for anything connected to the Hart Dominion Aspen retreat. What I found made my stomach drop. It wasn't a corporate seminar. The photos I uncovered were grainy, but undeniable, a lavish party held at a remote mountain villa full of expensive liquor, dim lighting, and the unmistakable, intimidating presence of Celine and Sterling Hart, the powerful sibling duo who ran Hart Dominion. They were known for their influence, their shadows, and their ruthlessness. This was not training. This was something darker. Something designed for secrecy and leverage, something Damon had chosen to hide. I looked in the mirror that night. My eyes were dimmed, my heart guarded, my breath shallow. I whispered to myself, not as a reassurance, but as a commitment everything is about to change. I finally accepted that my fight was no longer with Damon's infidelity, but with the cold, powerful system that had consumed him. Ezra's confirmation of Damon's riverfront location gave me the external coordinates of the betrayal, but I needed the internal evidence to understand the chilling why. My investigation had to move from tracking Damon's physical movements to accessing his digital life. That night, as Damon showered, humming softly, a terrifyingly normal sound, I slipped his phone from the bedside table. My hands did not shake. My breath did not stutter. It was a mechanical detachment. I had already purchased the necessary software and hardware. I hooked his phone up to my laptop and installed a remote tracking and cloning program. It felt like slipping into a role I was never meant to play, but which, out of pure necessity, I was suddenly frighteningly good at. When Damon came out, towel drying his hair, he smiled at me, a brief, weak acknowledgement. And he believed my performance. He truly believed that I was still the predictable, unsuspecting wife. Within 2 days, Ezra was able to use the new access to confirm the GPS logs repeatedly. Every night, Damon claimed he was staying late at Hart Dominion's headquarters, but his phone pinged the same quiet neighborhood along the river in Portland, settling precisely at the address of a discreet, expensive home. Ezra drove to the location and returned with a folder of still shots taken from a nearby security camera. In the grainy footage, Damon wasn't alone. Celine Hart, the sleek, commanding co-owner of the company, walked beside him. Her hand brushed his arm. Her body leaned toward his in a way no boss should. Damon followed her into the house without hesitation. Watching that clip felt like someone had pressed a cold fist against my heart and twisted. Not because he was cheating. I already knew that, clinically, but because he had chosen her, someone who represented everything he once said he hated: the arrogance, the manipulation, the hunger for control that defined the Hart family empire. Ezra had also managed to obtain audio recordings from a discreet device he had planted in Damon's car earlier that week. One evening, a smooth, amused, highly controlled female voice filled the recording. It was Celine Hart. "She won't suspect anything if you know how to play your part, Damon," she purred. Damon sighed, sounding tired and afraid. "I'm trying, but Emilia is smart. She'll figure it out." Hearing him say that felt worse than the cheating itself. He knew me. He knew exactly how deeply this level of deceit, this fundamental betrayal, would cut, yet he still walked straight into the fire and dragged me with him. And now he was afraid I would ruin the secret he was clinging to. Ezra's full report arrived soon after, peeling back the final layer of protective skin around the wound. The deeper it went, the more it burned. I learned more about the Aspen retreat than Damon had ever intended anyone to know. Ezra reported the event took place in Sterling Hart's private mountain estate, an isolated villa known for hosting closed-door gatherings for Hart Dominion's inner circle. The alcohol was endless, and the rules were non-existent. The report included a video taken from a balcony camera. In the early morning haze, Damon slipped out of Celine Hart's room. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair disheveled. The look on his face was not one of shame, but of someone who had already crossed a deep, ethical line and no longer cared to step back. The footage, Ezra noted, had been quietly offered for sale on an underground corporate exchange site. Someone recorded it with the intention of using it. Watching that clip didn't break me in the emotional way I expected. Instead, I felt profoundly detached, as if I were observing a stranger wearing my husband's face. The more I learned, the less I recognized the man I married. By the time I closed the last page of Ezra's detailed report, something inside me settled into a terrible, cold certainty. Damon hadn't just betrayed me with one woman. He had built an entirely separate life with separate rules, separate desires, and separate loyalties. A life where I didn't exist, and where he was willing to compromise his morals for a perceived slice of power. That night, I wrote in my journal, the same one I once used to track our vacations and anniversaries. The final line on the page read, "If he chose a different life, then I will choose myself, and I will make sure he faces what he ran from." The investigation had uncovered the truth. Now, I would dismantle the world that enabled it. The investigation was complete, but the Harts were watching. I had uncovered the betrayal, the extortion, and the dangerous environment Damon had chosen. Now, I had to face the reality of the danger I was in, a danger that extended far beyond a ruined marriage. The audio from Damon's car painted a picture of absolute, terrifying corporate ruthlessness. I heard him speaking to a coworker on a separate, hidden phone one evening, his voice low and conspiratorial. He laughed under his breath and said, "That night was just the beginning. Sterling wanted to see who had what it takes to be part of the higher circle." Hearing that made my skin crawl. Damon wasn't lured blindly. He had willingly walked into something intentional and degrading because he craved the prestige and power it offered. That same evening, Ezra forwarded me an anonymous message from someone who used to be a manager at Hart Dominion. The message was stark. It said, "If you think this is just cheating, you're wrong. What you're dealing with is one of the Hart initiation rituals. They record everything. My stomach tightened. This wasn't about infidelity anymore. This was about control, leverage, and a systemic abuse designed to destroy anyone who tried to walk away. Ezra then sent another set of photos, Rowan Hart, Sterling's son, holding a camera as he recorded Damon and Celine from different angles during the Aspen retreat. The scenes were deliberately staged to create maximum vulnerability. Damon was trapped. Or worse, he had agreed to be trapped. I sat with all of it, letting the weight settle around me until I could breathe again. For the first time, I realized that confronting Damon wasn't enough. The problem wasn't only him, it was the environment he chose, the people he served, and the power he craved. I had made my decision. I would not just unravel Damon's secrets. I would dismantle the world that enabled them, but danger doesn't stay hidden for long. One afternoon, my phone rang from an unknown number. I answered, and Celine Hart's voice slipped through the speaker, smooth, cold, almost amused. She never raised her voice, but every word was a steel blade. "Emilia, you're digging into matters that have nothing to do with you," she said. "I suggest you stop. Your curiosity will come with consequences." She spoke about Damon as if he were a company asset, as if my marriage license were nothing more than a misplaced receipt. The call was short, but it carried the unmistakable message that I had crossed a line she believed she owned. That night, an email arrived from an anonymous sender. The writing was crisp, professional, and threatening. "If you want your husband to keep his job and his reputation, step back." I knew who sent it. Sterling's fingerprints were all over the chilling, authoritative tone. 2 nights later, a black sports utility vehicle parked across the street from my house. It didn't move. It didn't turn its lights on. It simply sat there, engine cold, windows tinted, watching. Ezra confirmed the plates belonged to one of Hart Dominion's contracted security firms. The realization hit me with chilling force. I wasn't observing their world anymore. Their world was observing me. Despite the fear climbing up my spine, a sharper instinct settled beneath it resolve. I wasn't uncovering the truth to save Damon. I was doing it to save myself from the trap he had fallen into and from the people who believed they could intimidate me into silence. One night, Damon left his phone unattended in the living room. While pretending to be tidying up, I opened his recently deleted files. Hidden in the trash folder was a video. It showed him and Celine in her home, the angle clearly from above and discreetly placed. Damon wasn't the one recording it. That meant Celine or Sterling kept it as insurance, another thread in their web of control. I closed the phone, my pulse steady. The picture was complete now. Damon was hopelessly compromised. Celine and Sterling were escalating their threats. And I was done playing quietly. That night, lying awake in the dark, I made a promise to myself. I would find every piece of evidence I needed. I would expose the empire Celine and Sterling had built. I would not stop until the world they hid behind collapsed beneath them. The war had begun. Tonight was the night the marriage would end, not with screaming, but with truth laid bare. I had reached a point where pain could no longer guide me. The grief that once threatened to drown me had hardened into a singular, sharp strategy. I no longer felt like a woman abandoned. I felt like a woman preparing for war. I spent the early evening gathering everything I had collected. The man I had married was still pacing in the hallway, agitated, constantly deleting messages on his phone, entirely unaware that Ezra had already cloned every file before Damon touched a single button. Damon's desperation wasn't for me. It was the crushing fear of what Celine or Sterling might do if he slipped out of line. I organized the evidence on the large dining table, treating the surface like a prosecutor's desk, the photographs of Damon with Celine, the security footage of him entering the riverfront house, the Aspen recordings, the lab results confirming the HIV reactive sample, the GPS logs, and the chilling audio messages where Celine threatened him. Every single piece of evidence Ezra had uncovered about the Hart Dominion system of seduction and extortion was now laid out for immediate consumption. When Damon walked into the dining room, he stopped short. The air left his lungs in a silent rush. Every secret he thought he had buried, every lie he had constructed, every act of submission to the Hart family's control was laid out in front of him. His betrayal, his lies, his fear, the evidence of every moment he tried to hide was undeniable. His face drained of color, going pale as marble, as if someone had carved the truth out of him with a cold instrument. He began to crumple, admitting pieces of the story in hoarse whispers, trying desperately to manage the narrative. He confessed to staying out late, to drinking too much, to making a mistake. But he avoided the heart of it. He didn't mention the rituals in Aspen. He didn't mention the recordings used to bind him. He offered the smallest fragment of the truth, hoping that would be enough to earn my comfort and stop the interrogation. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't interrupt his clumsy attempts at confession. I simply waited. Silence, I had learned, could be sharper than any attack. My stillness forced him to keep talking, to keep filling the terrible, silent void I had created. I was drunk, he managed, his voice cracking. I was tempted, Emilia. Someone pushed too far. I've been ashamed every day. I finally spoke, my voice low and level, cutting through his excuses. Shame, Damon, when it leaves out the details, is just another form of manipulation. You keep telling me you were coerced once. But I have videos of you with Celine, not just in San Diego, but long before Aspen. I continued to describe how I felt watching him cling to the selective version of remorse, a version designed to protect himself, not to honor me. The pressure broke him. His hands started shaking violently. The carefully constructed face, 8 of the last 6 months shattered, and the terrified, small man underneath was exposed. Finally, he confessed that he had been recorded and threatened for months. He admitted that Sterling used video evidence to control his career progression. He admitted that Celine dangled approval and access like a prize. He admitted that he had been afraid every single day since the retreat. But then, he said something that snapped the last thread of sympathy I held for him. He looked down at his hands, his voice barely audible, thick with humiliation. "But I also stayed," he whispered. "There were moments I stayed because I liked the praise, the attention, the power I felt when Celine whispered that I was special. Hearing that broke something inside me, not my heart, but the last vestige of hope that he was simply a victim. Damon wasn't just coerced. He was both victim and accomplice. He wasn't forced into everything. He was a willing participant who found a twisted form of validation in a corrupt, dangerous system. He had traded our life for a pat on the head and a promise of power. The truth stood between us now like a wall neither of us could climb. I knew then that whatever storm I thought I had weathered so far was only the beginning. The marriage was dead. I was simply giving it a burial. I stood up, walked to the sideboard, and retrieved the papers I had prepared earlier. I was ready to close this chapter. Damon's confession was a prelude. The divorce papers were the closing argument. The marriage had died long before this moment. I was simply providing the legal paperwork for its burial. I laid the divorce papers down on the table, then slid a restraining order across the surface, right over the pile of evidence. The crinkle of the paper sounded loud in the otherwise silent room. Damon's breath hitched, a desperate, animal sound. His panic was no longer controlled. He begged, the fear of losing everything finally overriding his need for control. "Emilia, please," he pleaded, tears welling in his eyes. "I can fix this. I know I screwed up, but I can fix this. Just tell me what to do." I shook my head slowly, still maintaining that terrifying, controlled calm. "You fixed it months ago, Damon, when you chose to stay with them because you liked the way it felt. The truth stands between us now, and it's a wall. We're done." He reached across the table, his hand hovering over the papers. He was losing not just me, but the stability, the reputation, and the comfortable life I represented. And then his phone vibrated. It was lying face up on the table, right next to the evidence pile. A cruel twist of fate. A new message lit up the screen instantly, flashing the name Celine Hart across the display. The message read, "If you don't come now, we will release everything." The words hit him like a physical blow. His face went from desperate pleading to sheer, unadulterated terror. He looked at the message, then at the divorce papers, then at the damning evidence, and in that instant, I finally saw the truth of his choices, naked and ugly. He wasn't losing just me, he was losing everything he'd clung to in that secret world. His fear wasn't fear of losing his wife, it was fear of losing them. He scrambled to flip the phone over, but it was too late. I had seen it. He knew I had seen it. I looked at him finally, seeing him clearly. He was someone who had already chosen his life, and it wasn't ours. His priority, even in his moment of greatest vulnerability, was the danger posed by Hart Dominion, not the destruction of his home. I pushed the divorce papers closer to him. "Sign it, Damon." He didn't argue. He didn't beg again. His hands trembled violently as he picked up the pen. He signed his name to the divorce agreement first, then to the restraining order, his signature shaky and unrecognizable. He didn't look at me again. I don't think he could. When Damon stood up, his movements were those of a broken puppet. His shoulders slumped, his steps uneven as he walked out of the dining room, out of the house. He looked like a man walking toward the remains of his own ruins. I watched him go without anger, without pity, only with the profound clarity of knowing the life we shared was already gone. The quiet that settled over the house was absolute, but I didn't let it last. I immediately called Marlowe Quinn, my attorney, and Ezra Pike, my investigator. "It's time," I said into the phone, my voice steady, professional. "We take down Hart Dominion." The conversation was brief and tactical. The plan was no longer about a quiet divorce settlement. It was about leveraging the evidence. The corporate recordings, the coercion, the HIV reactive sample, which proved a dangerous pattern of risky behavior in their ritual system, into the largest corporate and criminal lawsuit possible. An hour later, an email arrived from Sterling Hart himself, routed through layers of anonymizing services. It contained no threats of exposure, only cold, corporate menace. It read, "You've gone too far. If you think you've won, you don't understand who I am, Di." I closed the message calmly. The external threat was escalating, just as I had anticipated. My fight was no longer with Damon. It was with the empire that had consumed him, and I was prepared to burn it down. The feeling was not one of vengeance, but of necessary defense. I was protecting the life Damon's weakness had exposed. I was reclaiming my security, my identity, and my future starting tonight. The war had moved from the marital bedroom to the corporate boardroom. The silence after Damon left felt different. It was not empty, but open. It didn't ache the way I thought grief would. It felt like the first breath after being underwater for too long. Marlowe and I spent the next several days assembling the legal assault. We filed claims that reached far beyond the typical scope of divorce, targeting Hart Dominion for corporate crimes, coercion, illegal surveillance, extortion, workplace abuse, and knowingly exposing employees to health risks. Ezra supplied the missing link: footage of Sterling ordering his team to record Damon and Celine in Aspen, making it crystal clear the videos were meant for leverage, not security. The moment that footage entered our case file, everything changed. We were no longer talking about infidelity, we were talking about crimes on a corporate scale. Then, the essential validation arrived. A second victim reached out, someone who had also been coerced during the retreat, who had been recorded and threatened, just like Damon. Their testimony turned our civil case into a criminal investigation, widening the scope far beyond the boundaries of my broken marriage. We submitted the lawsuit, and with it, a petition to restrict Sterling and Celine from contacting me. Filing it didn't feel like revenge. It felt like reclaiming my life, one page at a time. News traveled quickly through the financial world. Before the week ended, I learned that Damon had been hospitalized for a breakdown. He requested a call. I didn't answer. Instead, Marlowe sent him the necessary legal documents. I had nothing left to give him, not even comfort. And then the collapse began. Celine, panicked under the crushing weight of the investigation, confessed far more than expected. She exposed the entire internal structure of Hart Dominion, the recruitment tactics, the hidden cameras, the rituals, and the deep, secret files Sterling kept on vulnerable employees. Her confession fractured the leadership instantly. Within days, media outlets uncovered decades of misconduct. The company's stock plummeted to a fraction of its value. Prosecutors opened official inquiries. The empire Damon had sacrificed so much for was imploding with terrifying speed. Sterling, realizing his meticulously built world was crumbling, lashed out at everyone around him. Then came the final, shocking blow. Celine and Rowan, Sterling's son, were found dead in Sterling's mountain villa. Both shot. Sterling took his own life in his office shortly after. The truth died with them, but the evidence lived on. The investigation would continue, but the source of the poison had been permanently removed. Weeks later, I stood at Damon's memorial. He had died from an overdose, not the illness he feared. His parents wept as I stood silently at the back of the room. I felt no hate, no lingering love, just the profound sadness of watching a man lose himself so completely that he couldn't find his way back to reality. When I stepped out into the cool Portland air, it felt like stepping into a new lifetime, one where my identity wasn't tied to a broken marriage, to Damon's secrets, or to the shadows of Hart Dominion. As I walked toward my car, Naomi Pierce, a colleague I'd met through Ezra's network during the investigation, called out to me. She was a systems auditor, sharp and fiercely independent. She asked if I wanted to grab a drink sometime. For the first time in months, I didn't hesitate. I didn't reach for my analyst's logic to calculate the risk. I simply said yes. Looking back, I realized something profound. I wasn't simply someone who had been betrayed. I was someone who survived a system designed to break people from the inside out. And I walked away with a clearer sense of who I was than ever before. I ended the chapter of my marriage with a quiet, powerful truth. I lost a husband, but I found myself. And that, to me, was the greatest victory I'd ever claimed. The coldness I had embraced for survival was thawing, making room for a strength that came not from avoiding pain, but from finally understanding and honoring my own worth. I walked through the devastation, and I emerged whole.